The present King of France is bald. You look at that, that sounds like a simple atomic fact. No, it's not. It's a molecular fact. Because it really combines two things, as you see when you try to translate this into symbolic form. Now, those of you who've had some introduction to symbolic logic will recognize that here we're talking about an existent individual who is the present King of France and who is bald. There exists such an X, that X is the king and X is bald. You see. So you have, here's one atomic fact, here's another atomic fact. The molecular proposition combines these two and says that this X who is bald is the X who is also the present King of France. Could be a piece of mistaken identity. You see. So the analysis then proceeds in this way, and the symbolic logic provides a very convenient sort of tool. Now notice, in addition to the term atomic facts and atomic propositions, that atomic propositions correspond to atomic facts. So you have here a correspondence theory definition of truth. And he spells that out very carefully. He wants to say that for a proposition to be true, there has to be a one-to-one correlation between the atomic propositions and the atomic facts, between the terms of the atomic propositions and the properties in the atomic facts. A one-to-one correlation of a very precise sort. Now, with that logical atomism, he goes on, of course, to try the deductive process. But notice what he's landed up with philosophically already. Pluralism as distinct from monism in metaphysics. Phenomenalism as distinct from realism. Well, he oscillates a bit between the two and comes out on the side of the angels as a realist in the end, but all right, he's in that phenomenalism realism game. He is rejecting speculative metaphysics in favor of analysis, logical analysis. His atomic facts are themselves neither mental or material, they are neutral with regards to those distinctions. He's what we call a neutral monist, qualitative monist, only one quality of fact. You see. And that quality is neutral with regards to mind-body distinctions. That is possible because molecular propositions and complex ideas are mental constructs, our constructs. We construct our objects out of atomic facts. They don't come to us already constructed because relationships are not given. We're bombarded through the senses with a variety of atomic facts. Yes, relationships are not given. And so the object which emerges in our thinking of a material body, that notion of a material object is a mental construct, a logical construct. It's an ideal entity, whether or not it's real externally. It exists as an idea. Now, this is known as the construction theory of knowledge. because what we know are our own mental constructs. Now you see how he sort of, despite being a foundationalist, stumbled into being sort of a postmodern. You see, we construct our own world. Okay? Oh, he makes a distinction in a number of places in his early writings, and this is retained throughout. He makes a distinction between knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description. Knowledge by acquaintance is knowledge of sense data, you see. Knowledge of our own mental states. Knowledge by description is knowledge of material objects, like the present King of France. And those are mental constructs that we describe. So the constructs are described in the language of molecular propositions, complex ideas. Okay. It's the particular properties. It's here that knowledge by acquaintance functions. Okay. It's here that knowledge by description is most obvious. And depending on what stage he's at, realist, phenomenalist, the atomic facts are going to be either by acquaintance or description, sometimes one, sometimes another. All right, now what about the deductive part of this? How does that work? Because we said that he wanted all explanation to be in terms of a deductive system. Well, take his, as the example, his book, Human Knowledge, its scope and limits, published in 1948. Human Knowledge, its scope and limits. Here he was trying to organize in logical form the scope of the nature of scientific knowledge. Trying to show how all of our knowledge arises by scientific methods, essentially this hypothetico-deductive procedure. He came to the realization that if he wanted to do this by deduction from empirical generalizations of which we have certain direct empirical verification, that is to say samples that we can verify, that we don't have enough premises to achieve the deduction. In other words, scientific knowledge has to involve additional hypotheses than simply hypotheses which are amenable to any kind of direct verification. He admits, therefore, that pure empiricism does not provide a logical explanation. That we have to introduce additional premises that he calls scientific postulates. That is to say, the postulates of modern science. Postulates that make scientific explanation of this hypothetico-deductive sort workable. And he spells out what these are. The two or three most significant ones are things like the principle of induction, uniformity of nature, the principle of induction. causal lines. There are lines of causal influence, causal lines. The quasi-permanence of material objects. Okay? In other words, he has to introduce as postulates the very things which earlier metaphysical systems had maintained that there was metaphysical ground for believing. You see? So that in effect what Hume asserted as beliefs that are necessary in the course of life, Russell elevates to the status of scientific postulates necessary in the course of science. But then on that basis, he thinks that scientific knowledge can be justified, explained, that the logical analysis works. Okay, now that's the overview of Russell. Question? Comment? Have you gotten to reading Stumpf on this yet? Okay, no wonder you're sitting like ducks in a row. Yeah, Mary.
You said that. Could you explain further the neutrality that you talked about?
Yeah, what he calls neutral monism. Okay, Descartes introduced a qualitative dualism. There are two kinds of reality, minds and bodies. Okay? There are two kinds of reality, minds and bodies. In talking about mind-body problems, pretty well ever since Descartes, we've talked of two kinds of properties, mental properties and physical properties. Okay? Mental properties which involve consciousness, physical properties which involve extension. Well, what Russell is saying is that there aren't two kinds of properties. There aren't two kinds of entities. There's only one kind of property, which is neutral with regards to that mind-body distinction. So that a space-time event organized in a certain way produces what we call, naming our mental construct, a mental event. And organized in another way produces what, naming our mental construct, we call a body. Now, Russell isn't the only one with this view. William James had this notion, and he explained it in what he called the searchlight theory of consciousness. That is to say, what you have to do is to picture something going along like that. Let's say it's a chain of physical events, which is lit up at this point by searchlight, yeah? That is to say, consciousness is aroused, you see, when you light upon that, catch the plane in the searchlight, you see, so that this one event at that juncture is both a physical event and a mental event. Were there nothing of this chain of events, it would be just a mental event. And in that sense, hallucination, illusion, daydreaming, vision. But inasmuch as there is this other,